Welcome to the first episode of Editing Your Photos. Ladies and gentlemen, today is the day I've been waiting for, where I finally edit some of these raw photos from my friend on Instagram, using the magical world of Lightroom on your pocket. I asked this guy last month if he would like to participate on this first episode of Editing Your Photos. Then he did. I asked him to submit his raw photos on my Gmail account. This guy provided me 5 great raw images, which is all of them are really underexposed, and there's no rules provided for this particular episode. This meant that I could edit all of these photos in my own editing style. Let me introduce you this guy. He's a great photographer, designer, and content creator as well. Make sure to check out his Instagram account and YouTube channel. I'll leave a link in the description below. And if you like this kind of content, then smash that subscribe button and most importantly, hit that bell button to stay notified about future videos. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get into it. This is the first photo that we're going to edit. So here we are inside the Lightroom, and the first thing I need to do with this photo is to crop, because our focal point is the parrot, and I want to make it even more centered. The photo is pretty underexposed, so I'm going to bring up the exposure and bringing down the highlights and making the shadows higher, and the whites and black should be higher to recover the lost details of the photo. I only use the white tone curve for this particular subject because I want to brighten up the whole photo and add some contrasty feeling. And for the colors, I bring up the slider of temp to add some warm and yellowish tone, and also I bring up the slider of the tint for absolutely no reason at all. I bring up the vibrance and saturation to add some intensity of the colors. And here we are in the HSL panel, and I'm just making some basic adjustments right here. The colors of this photo looks very saturated, and it absolutely looks horrible, but we will fix that later. After using the color mix, I'm heading up to Effects panel. I make the texture and clarity on this photo higher to make it even more detailed, and also I added a vignettes, but not too high. They're not always necessary, so use them on a creative way of editing. I didn't use the split tone for this particular subject. And there you go, here we are at the details panel. I'm just making some really basic adjustments here. After that, I used the selective adjustment and I added a radial gradient and place it to the body of the parrot, then I adjust it. I also use the mask option and duplicate the gradient and place it to the head. As you can see on this photo, I simply adjust the exposure to brighten up the parrot itself. And also I added a linear gradient and place it to the bottom part of the subject. I want to make this area much darker, so I bring down the slider of exposure and I reposition the gradient at a better photo angle. But I'm still not satisfied with the result. So I added a radial gradient and make it as a highlights. Then I slightly lifted up the exposure. Now, here's the result. That's very easy to edit using Lightroom on your pocket. And if you want to know how to edit underexposed photos, you can check out my previous video. I leave a link in the description below. By the way, if you want to participate to upcoming episode of Editing Your Photos, don't hesitate to send me your raw photos on my Gmail account. So let's not gonna waste any more time. Let's jump into our second photo. It starts with cropping the whole photo, and honestly I didn't use my own preset here. I just want to make this photo like a greenish tone because that's the only idea I have for this photo, and I expected for a great result. I used to load down the contrast as well as the highlights, and the shadow and the whites should remain higher, and I should probably reduce the blacks a little bit. There you go. I firstly used the white tone curve to adjust the brightness level. And also I used the blue tone curve to add some bluish tone for this particular photo. And for the colors, I used to bring down the slider of the temp as well as the vibrance to make it even cooler image. But the saturation should be higher to add some intensity of the colors and not looks desaturated at all. But for the HSL panel I only adjusted some few different colors down here, so I'm not gonna explain to you guys of what I'm doing right here. I bring up the slider of texture and clarity to darken some contrasty image areas because the photo looks more on contrast. And also I want to achieve the greenish tone for this photo, so I use the split tone. In Lightroom, this tool is very important, particularly when you are a photographer, because on this tool, we can achieve the tone we really wanted to have for our photo. Just like that. I only adjusted some few adjustments here, like the first photo, because when you're working with raw images, it will already provide you the default settings for details panel. That's why I don't pay much attention for this settings. Anyways, back to our main topic, I came back to curves again, and basically what I did was to darken the photo, because I guess the first edit was suck. But we are not done yet. I used the brush adjustment tool and paint this area, because it looks different to our main tone for this photo, which is greenish tone. So what I need to do is to load down the slider of temp, and I'm gonna make this desaturated. I also adjusted the hue just to make this area match to our main tone. Then the last adjustment is only the clarity, and here's our result. That is our result, and that's very easy to do without using your own preset. By the way, if you love photography, then don't hesitate to follow and give some hearts to these guys. His Instagram account was linked on the description below. Now, let's jump into our third photo. I really love editing this type of photo, particularly when it's really underexposed, and I had a great opportunity to fix the exposure and recover the image's lost details. The first thing we're gonna need to do is bringing up the exposure slightly and reduce the highlights. Also, the shadows should be higher to brighten up some shadowy areas. And now we can clearly see our model and recovered the lost details. I slightly reduced the temp to create a cold-looking image because I don't want to make it so intense with its color. We're inside the HSL panel, and essentially what I did was change the yellow flower to red, and I guess it doesn't look obnoxious at all. And after that I simply adjusted some few color adjustments here. Then after that, I use the essential tool on Lightroom, which is the curves. I simply use the white curves to adjust the brightness levels as well as the contrast. Then I'm heading up to the simple but powerful, the effects panel, and here I'm just adding a simple adjustments and keeping it pretty and simple looking. Basically, when you're adjusting the vignettes with a bright photo, don't make it too much. If you don't adjust it properly, it will probably blemish the whole frame. Then here we are at our last panel, which is sometimes necessary, and sometimes photographers opting to leave it as a default settings. So basically I'm just doing some few and basic adjustments here. Then I cropped the whole photo, and now it's ready to post it on Instagram. But wait, there's still an underexposed area, which is the face of our model. So I simply add a gradient to her face, then adjust the exposure, but not too much. Then here's our final result. I really love the result of this photo, great capture, and big shout out to your model. Thank you so much for submitting me this photo, keep up the good work. So I'm not gonna waste your precious time. Let's jump into our fourth photo. Beautiful seascape taken from Barcelona on Spain, and great capture. So what I essentially want to do with this picture is to add a sky to it. This is absolutely what I really want for our photo, but we don't use Photoshop, we just use PixArt, which is probably going to lose the quality of an image if you export any images on PixArt. These is the before and after of image qualities if you edit and export photos on PixArt. Unlike Adobe Photoshop, it won't change its quality after exported. So I'm sorry guys, I'm not going to add the sky to that photo because I don't want to lose the photo quality. Anyways, let's jump into the Lightroom. I dropped my preset here because that's the only preset that gives sense to our photo. And after that, I lift up very slightly the exposure and brought down the contrast because the photo looks very dark. This is where I adjust the overall brightness and contrast of the whole image. I adjusted the brightness here and bring it up slightly to provide a balanced exposure. Also, I adjusted the contrast, not too dark and not too much. The blue curve may not too necessary for this photo, but I adjusted it anyways. Then after that I used the effects panel and just adding some few adjustments. And I guess it looks great anyways. Here's our final edited photo. Jumping into our next and final one for this video. A great capture taken in Slovenia, and I'm pretty sure I can edit this in my own style. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. I always start with cropping the entire photo, particularly when it's landscape photography. After that, I came to the basic panel and raised the exposure slightly, and also I reduced its contrast slightly because some areas are dark. And also the sky of this particular photo looks horrible, so I bring down the highlights, as well as the shadows, and the whites and blacks. Probably you already know the functions of those adjustments. I raise the mid-tone slightly to affect the overall brightness. I also bring down the bottom left tone to add a slight contrast to the whole photo. I brought down the slider of the temp because I want to make this photo looks moody, and also I brought down the vibrance by 30 and raised up the saturation, and I think we're almost there to achieve the moody tone for this photo. I raised up some saturations here cause there's a lot areas that still looks desaturated. I use the effects panel and bring up the texture to improve the contrast for this photo, and also I bring down slightly the clarity to reduce the intense darkness for this photo, because if you make it too high it will probably increase its contrast, that will likely to darken the whole image. I concentrated primarily on sharpening to create an illusion of details. Since the photo of those trees looks really unclear, there's a lot of noise we can see in those trees, so I lift up the noise reduction higher. Then after that, I used the brush tool on selective adjustment and painted the castle. Since this was our focal point for this particular photo, I essentially want this castle to pop up and make it even stands out. After masking the castle, I adjusted the exposure very slight and bring down the contrast. I concentrated on highlights and whites to illuminate the castle and even stand out. The reason I masked the castle is because I want to make it a point of interest for people watching and even seeing this photograph. I slightly bring up the temp slider to add a warm tone for this castle, and also I bring up the slider of saturation to add some intense with its color. I lifted up the texture and clarity to enhance and brings sharpness to the photo, and I raised up the sharpness just to make this castle much sharper, and also I reduced the noise to make it even smoother. Finally, I added a linear gradient and put it in the sky. I lifted up the exposure and increased the contrast to lighten up some of this light area, and also I bring up the highlights very slight, and the shadows should be higher as well, because I don't want to make this whites on the sky looks muted. For this photo, I bring the temp slider by 12 to add some warm tone, and I do not want to make the sky looks very desaturated, so I bring up the saturation higher. And I lifted up some textures and clarity here to make it even more detailed subject. I dragged down the slider of the haze to add a haze to the sky and the woods as well, and also I used this healing mask to remove this sort of paper stuffs. Then here's our final edited photo. Then I think that will be our final one for today's video, and if you like or dislike each of those edited photos, comment down below. This video is a friendly atmosphere that makes you feel very free to express your views on the comments about these photos and provide some constructive criticism. Lastly, I want to say thank you to this guy. Without his raw photos, this video is nothing. And also I want to say thank you to my few subscribers who are still there to support this small channel. It does really mean a lot to me, and I hope I will see you in my next video.